evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB, News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, happy to be with you. Let's start with the fact that John McCain has died. Before I say anything else about that, I want to go ahead and pass along my sincere condolences to the family, no matter what you may think of John McCain, and I do not think highly of him. His family has suffered a traumatic loss. It is a difficult thing, to put it mildly, to lose a patriarch. We're talking about someone who was a husband, who was a father. I don't know if he had grandchildren. But to say he was not a significant individual in the family would be ridiculous, and he's very significant to them. They are in mourning, and they should be allowed to have their space to grieve. And I have no issues with the family, the wife, the children of John McCain. My issues are with the man himself. And I take significant issue with the revisionist history that has been going on most profoundly in the last day or so since he's passed. But it's been going on for a long time. The claim that he was a war hero, which was disputed quite famously by current President Donald Trump during the campaign, is backed up by other information that's floating around on cyberspace as well. Not all of it is to be easily dismissed.
As a Vietnam veteran, and I know of a lot of Vietnam veterans, brother, and a few POWs, and all the POWs that I've talked to over the years say that John McCain is a lying skunk. You know, that he never was tortured. They were there in the camp with him, and when he came in with his two broken arms because he failed to pull his arms in when he bailed out of his plane and had a leg injury, he immediately started spilling his guts about everything because he didn't want to get tortured. And he made 32 different videos for the communists speaking out against America and how evil they were for what they were doing in Vietnam.
In which circumstances have you been shut down? I was on a flight over the city of Hanoi, and I was bombing and was hit by either missile or anti-aircraft fire. I'm not sure which. And the plane continued straight down. And I ejected and broke my leg and both arms and went into a lake, parachuted into a lake.
Information shows that he made over 32 tapes of propaganda for the Vietnamese government.
We do know that when he was there, that he cooperated with communist news services in giving interviews that were not flattering to the United States.
He may have heard a POW or heard them coming into his cell and said, "Oh my God, is that Admiral McCain's son? Is that the Admiral's son? Is that Johnny telling us that our principal targets are schools, orphanages, hospitals, temples, churches?" That was Jane Fonda's line.
All of the codes, all of the data, everything. And I'm not even so much blaming him for that, because under torture people do that, but it turns out he wasn't tortured, and then he started singing like a canary in seconds.
Yeah, they call him, the Vietnamese communists call him the Songbird. Matter of fact, that's his code name up there is Songbird McCain, because he just came into the camp singing and telling them everything they wanted to know.
So, was he tortured or not? Even the Vietnamese who dealt with him while he was a prisoner of war, no one's disputing he was a prisoner of war, they don't agree with the assertion that he was tortured. He made claims that the Cubans participated in Vietnamese torture of Americans, and Fidel Castro famously refuted that back during the 2008 campaign. The truth of the matter is, you either believe John McCain or you believe others. But as far as definitive proof, what about his injuries? As they said, if he had pulled his arms in when he ejected, he probably wouldn't have broken his arms. There is the other thing about his statements to the enemy, and it said, you heard in that clip, he supposedly made some 30-plus videotapes. I probably would imagine they were audio tapes at the time. And that's disputed. Oh, he didn't do that. But here is John McCain in his own voice in a audio that was discovered that seems to be around vintage 1969. And now you tell me, does this sound like someone who is actually representing the interests of the American nation and standing in solidarity with his fellow prisoners of war and other military members who are still on the battlefield?
To the Vietnamese people and the government of the DRVN, from John Sidney McCain, 624787, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, born 29 August 1936, Panama, home state, Florida. Shot down 26 October 1967, A-4 aircraft. I, as a U.S. airman, am guilty of crimes against the Vietnamese country and people. I bombed their cities, towns, and villages and caused many injuries, even death, to the people of Vietnam. I was captured in the capital city of Hanoi while attacking it. After I was captured, I was taken to the hospital in Hanoi, where I received very good medical treatment. I was given an operation on my leg, which allowed me to walk again, and a cast on my right arm, which was badly broken in 3 places. The doctors were very good, and they knew a great deal about the practice of medicine. I remained in the hospital for some time and regained much of my health and strength. Since I arrived in the camp of detention, I have received humane and meaning treatment. I received medical treatment and food, even though I came here as an aggressor, and the people who I injured have much difficulty in their living standards. I wish to express my deep gratitude for my kind treatment, and I will never forget this kindness extended to me.
Yes, he was a prisoner of war. Yes, he was under duress, to put it mildly. But I remember Captain Lance, or Lieutenant Lance P. Saigon, who was an actual hero, who actually died in custody because he would not participate in propaganda against the United States, as you hear in his own words with his own voice that John McCain did. John McCain's record as a war hero is disputable. His involvement with one of the worst naval disasters in American history, the fire aboard the Forrestal in 1967, the USS Forrestal, that's disputed as well, but there are many who would say that his desire to act like a hot dog pilot and use a wet start, which is putting extra flame into the exhaust of your plane while you're on the carrier deck to kind of show off, was a material contribution to the fire. My point would be, all that's disputed, but John McCain used it to his benefit as the foundation of his political career. I don't have any respect for that, nor can I point to any significant accomplishments by John McCain as a legislator in either House of Congress. His primary contribution to U.S. politics is to make sure that the agenda of the Democratic Party was not to be derailed. going so far as to guarantee the election of Barack Obama with one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen anyone run who claimed they wanted to be president. Defending the man before those who were ready to vote against him, and not even bothering to campaign in other areas where people were ready to support him. Despite all that, and it's interesting that a Democrat wants to do this, Chuck Schumer, despite the lack of accomplishment on behalf of John McCain, at least for the GOP side of the ledger, Chuck Schumer said this on Saturday.
The Senate, the country, the world are lesser places tonight with the loss of John McCain. As you go through life, you meet very few truly great men. He was one of them. He was a true patriot. He loved the country. He loved the military. He loved the Senate. And maybe most important of all, he was always willing to speak truth to power at a time when there are so few people who do that. He will be so missed. Nothing will replace his memory, but I will be introducing a resolution into the Senate to rename the Russell Building after John McCain so that future generations who work there and future generations throughout America will remember him. He was a dear friend. I spoke to Cindy McCain last night, and I knew the end was near. Told her what a wonderful man he was, and that my thoughts and prayers were with her and the McCain family.
This is absolutely stunning to me, but all I will say is that my condolences are with the family of John McCain, and I will add, my relief is for the United States of America in his passing. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we are bordering on a race genocide in South Africa, and it's hard to find anybody speaking about that in Western media. It's that simple. The CNN, the New York Times, the CBS, ABC, those people don't seem to find any interest. I do believe there was a Fox report on it. You could call it isolated, and I think that is what Donald Trump seized upon to do a recent tweet. Back in March, The Blaze, which is not necessarily considered a mainstream news organization, did a panel discussion on what was going on in South Africa, and these were their observations.
It doesn't matter what side, minority, majority, it's wrong to do this.
Why couldn't you go to one of the hostels that the government has set up?
Because of the skin color. Yeah, and yeah, it's not at all. We just help white people here. Because there's not the place that does it. If you go to, there's many places I know, Jesus Disciples, Manger, those places, they take blacks and they put the whites out.
That's from her documentary, but we had her on a couple weeks ago when she first released it, and the media pretty much ignored it. And then they started calling her out, saying she's siding with white supremacists. It's like completely missing what's going on here. And they're bordering on genocide now. They've already warned them, don't worry, we're not going to hurt you yet, is basically what they're saying to the farmers.
And what was the quote from the president? This time of reconciliation is over.
Right.
In a country with Nelson Mandela, that's saying something.
Apartheid was wrong. We know that. To say that a minority is controlling the majority and basically enslaving them. But we've heard just the opposite when it comes to America. You have to pay attention to every minority. Now, I'm not saying that I support apartheid. I'm just saying, can everybody treat each other well? One vote, one person? It's pretty simple.
The only ones covering what's happening or supposedly happening in South Africa right now really are alt-right sources all around the world. We cannot find a single legitimate source that's telling us what's going on in South Africa. So that means it's either not happening, which I don't believe, or the media is not covering it because they've already decided what's right, what's wrong.
And much of it is confirmed, by the way. The government themselves have said it. There's policies going into effect. You know, there's
nobody covering the people who are frightened.
And why not? It's a minority population. Their cameras somehow found their way to South Africa back in the day. Yeah. They had no problem finding it when it was apartheid.
Indeed, back in the day when it was apartheid, and when you had the evil white man oppressing the good black man, then you had no problem getting news cameras there. Now that it has switched, it is different. Since 2000, well, up through 2015, AmericanFreePress.org reported that the Nelson Mandela-led government in South Africa had kind of stood idly by while 70,000 whites were killed. That's, to be honest, that's not a significant amount of work. Black females in this country kill 4 times that many black children in less than a year. Nevertheless, this is really what happens when you try to impose democracy, which they have, one man, one vote, in a culture that is not homogeneous or homogenous, and where there are fractions and distrusts and even hatred. You can't have democracy in those environments. You will have what you have now as soon as a majority comes together. The VOA on the 23rd of August actually reported on the weighing in of the South African situation by Donald Trump, and these were their observations.
The South African land reforms are intended to address the historical injustices from the colonial times when black farmers were not allowed to own or rent farms. More than 70% of agricultural land remains in the hands of white farmers. The post-apartheid government has promised to rectify these injustices with a series of measures, including land redistribution and expropriation of farms without compensation. A recent Fox television report on the issue prompted Trump to say in a tweet Thursday that he asked his Secretary of State to closely study the South Africa land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. South African officials and political leaders were quick to respond.
There is no white genocide here. It's an absolute rubbish to say there is white genocide. There is black genocide in the USA.
Some have accused Trump of trying to stir racial conflict in South Africa. Others have said that he is trying to draw away attention from his own troubles. But some South Africans welcomed Trump's tweet.
We know now what the catastrophic course is that our government is taking, so we need the international community to send out a warning to say it is not in the interest of the country, it's not in the interest of the country's economy. Rethink your position, and I think Mr. Trump's tweet was a great start.
For many, the reform brings to mind neighboring Zimbabwe, where land expropriation and persecution of white farmers led to a sharp decline of agriculture and subsequent economic woes. Pressed on the issue at a news media briefing Thursday, the State Department spokesperson said the situation in South Africa cannot be compared to Zimbabwe.
It may be easy for some to try to draw a comparison, but there are very big differences. In Zimbabwe, we saw the government there squash civil society, shut down the media from doing their jobs and reporting, and destroyed an independent judiciary, and we have not seen that happen in South Africa.
But she said the expropriation of land without compensation could send South Africa down the wrong path.
We continue to encourage a peaceful and transparent public debate about what we consider to be a very important issue, and the South Africans certainly do as well.
The State Department official warned that poorly implemented land policies could be detrimental to political, social, and economic issues in South Africa. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Yeah, okay, so somebody got it before the president, and he decided to look into it. That's admirable. If he knew about it, he looked into it. Here's something I don't understand. Because now over in Nigeria, we actually have black-on-black genocide going on, and because we are so unsophisticated here in the United States, we don't think that that matters. If both races are the same, it's just folks don't like each other. Wrong. Muslims are committing genocide against Christians in Nigeria. Christian Broadcast Network, CBN of all places, is the ones who are talking about this, and they did this in a 16 July report on their broadcast network.
The Boko Haram terror group is still a threat, but recent attacks against Christians in Nigeria are coming from Muslim tribal herdsmen known as Fulanis.
What we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians, they're trying to possess their lands, and they're trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider Christians to be.
International human rights attorney Emmanuel Ogebe recently lost family members, including a pregnant mother, her husband, and their children.
And they went into their home and they killed their 4-year-old son and their 6-year-old daughter who were asleep in their beds.
The Fulani's weapon of choice? AK-47 automatic weapons, too expensive for most herdsmen. CBN Nigeria Director Felix Oisamoje.
Given how much an AK-47 will go for, a Fulani herdsman will probably need to sell all his cattle to be able to buy an AK-47.
Ogebe says there's a sinister side to those behind the attacks.
A lot of these cattle are owned by very rich Fulanis who are in government and who are in power. So there is a strong belief that the Fulanis, the ruling elite, are actually funding this herdsmen to conduct these attacks.
According to the Global Terrorism Index, Fulani herdsmen have killed as many as 60,000 people since 2001. And church leaders in Plateau State say, so far this year, the herdsmen have killed 6,000 Christians. Ogebe says by eliminating Christians, this group can dominate North and Central Nigeria politically and economically. Thousands of Christians need help to escape the violence.
I know that CBN 700 Club is in Nigeria, so if people support CBN, we know that CBN will deliver to the people who are afflicted.
Oisamoje says CBN is dispatching humanitarian teams to the affected regions. They recently provided free medical care in North Central Nigeria while sharing much-needed spiritual comfort.
I think one of the things we need the most is prayers, because after all, the Bible tells us that we do not war against flesh and blood. And so we know that there's spiritual issues, so we need to pray.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Pray indeed. But after you pray, someone needs to do something. This is what you have to understand. The America that leads the world is more aware of these things and willing to speak, if not act, upon them. Now, we have, in the case of South Africa, there is a genocide going on. I guarantee you most of the people in this country don't care because it's white people being killed. But they also don't care, and this is including the black people, they don't seem to care about the Christian Nigerians who are being killed by Muslim Nigerians. And that's because black people in America have walked away from God, generally speaking. When genocide occurs, I believe we had the statement from Martin Luther King, justice anywhere, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. But when you live in a culture that is still dominated to an extent by progressives, justice is a matter of interpretation. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, the Italians are pushing back against the European Union on immigration. What am I talking about? There's an AP report that is out now saying that the Catholic Church, Albania, and Ireland are going to take migrants. So what was he talking about? In Rome, Catholic bishops, tiny Albania, and Ireland agreed to take the 140 migrants blocked aboard an Italian Coast Guard vessel. The Premier Giuseppe Conte said Saturday, announcing the end of a 10-day standoff over asylum seekers, but making clear an angry Italy could avenge a perceived lack of overall European Union solidarity by refusing to approve the bloc's next multi-year budget. What is this? Italy saying, we're not going to have your immigration policy rammed down our throats. Italy must take note that the spirit of solidarity is struggling to translate into concrete acts, Conte said in a statement. And he's referring to declarations made at an EU summit in late June, promising to help Italy and other Mediterranean countries deal with the burden of migrants rescued from human traffickers and their unseaworthy boats. But that's not really translating well. In his role as head of a nearly 3-month-old populist coalition government, let's remember why the populist coalition government was formed. In part, and not necessarily a small part, Italy is being tired of being treated as the EU dumping ground for North African migrants, or people who are leaving the African continent through North Africa and invariably coming to Italy because Italy is relatively close. We know what migrants have done in other parts of Europe. We know what they're doing to the women of Germany. We know what they're doing to the women of Northern Europe. We know what they are doing in France. We know what the so-called Muslims, migrants, and refugees, the majority of whom seem to be Muslim, they seem to be setting up shop and doing damage in the countries that are opening their borders and doors to them. Eastern European countries have gotten the clue. They got the email. They understand what's going on. They simply closed their borders, and they told the EU to take a hike. It's not happening. We are not basically having you totally trash our identity as a sovereign nation to continue to support your policy that is against the idea that we should even have borders at all. What you really should understand is that the European Union is not about making one Europe where everybody lives happily ever after. They're looking to make a conquered Europe where everyone thinks the same. And they're looking to take away your identity. You cannot be French. You cannot be British. That's why British is gone now, or at least they're trying to get gone. You cannot be Italian. You cannot be Irish. You cannot be anything other than European. And for those who have not yet figured it out, they are using the disruptive influence of Muslim migrants who have no regard for anybody else's nationality, who have no regard for anybody else's culture, who have no regard for anybody else's religion or anything else, to come into nations and to break them down socially, to break them down, to break their will. And the only way that you can get away from the policy of the EU on immigration is to leave the EU. Well, Great Britain is trying to do that, and that is being made difficult. Other countries are getting tired. It was May of this year where Italy said enough and put in place a government that is looking at the EU and saying, you know what, we're about tired of this foolishness. Now, just before the Premier of Italy announced the resolution to this latest immigration drama, the Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, told party supporters at a rally in northern Italy that a Sicily-based prosecutor had put him under investigation for suspected abduction for refusing to let the migrants disembark. Do you understand what's going on here? You have Italians carrying out the policy of the European Union against other Italians who are elected and put in place by the Italian people to carry out their will. Who does that? And where does that type of stuff come from? It comes from a desire, because you say you're afraid of war. I understand where the European Union is coming from. You know, we've had wars because we've had all these borders in different countries, and we don't have really strong economies. The United States has beaten us to death. They're bigger than all of us combined. I get all that. But you're ignoring human nature. people tend to be tribal. That's neither good nor bad. It's just factual. Italians have their own language. They have their own culture. They have their own history. The same for the French, the same for the British, the same for the Germans, the same for the Polish, the same for you name it. And to try to tell them that that is not something that they should maintain, and instead they should open their doors and be totally welcoming to those who would destroy those cultures and then just trash them. And if they don't do it, then they are to be punished? Let me make this clear to everybody who is listening. The EU was a bad idea whose time had never come. It's no different than the League of Nations, which faltered and died. It's no different than the UN, which is only kept alive by the fact that the United States, for whatever reason, is willing to pay its bills and give it a home. These ideas that you can make everybody get along because you just want them to get along doesn't work. The UN will fall as soon as the United States pulls money from it and tells everybody to pitch in and supply a home for it. The EU will fall as soon as enough nations finally wake up to the fact that the European Union would rather them have no identity than resist having their cultures destroyed. Well, Italy is fighting back, and we'll see how they do. By the way, Ireland's not crazy about this either, even though they're taking these guys in. They're starting to have... You're not going to get this, and this is not racism when they start pushing back against having migrants thrust upon them. Everybody should be able to take in those who they believe will fit in to their countries. They should not be forced to take anybody. If you want to force people to take in Muslim migrants, there are a whole lot of Muslim countries who aren't taking in a soul, but that's another topic. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we had drug cartel killings in Alabama, in the Huntsville area. A local affiliate reported on it recently in this wise.
New details tonight from a grisly double homicide. Mariah Lopez, a 13-year-old, was decapitated. Her grandmother also killed. A case with connections to a drug cartel, all according to investigators. WFF 48's Lauren Sharf was inside the courtroom today when Yanni Aguilar, one of the capital murder suspects, met a judge.
Do you have anything to say for yourself? Yanni Aguilar kept tight-lipped as he entered the courtroom Thursday. Madison County investigator Stacey Rutherford took the stand for nearly an hour talking about what led up to this double homicide and how they narrowed in on their two suspects. In court, he said days before the murder, Yanni Aguilar, Israel Palomino, Aurelio Mendoza, and her friend Leticia went to Norcross, Georgia to pick up a large amount of drugs. Something on that trip made Palomino and Mendoza, the grandmother, get into a deadly argument later. On June 7th, deputies were called to a wooded area on Limley Drive where 13-year-old Mariah Lopez's body was found. Madison County Sheriff's Office interviewed both Aguilar and Palomino, but investigators say it wasn't until the second interview that he spilled more information. This after investigators told him that their cell phone pings put them at the location where Lopez's body was found. Aguilar then told investigators where to find Mendoza's body, near Moon Cemetery on Cave Springs Road. Some of the victims' family were inside the courtroom today, all of them in tears, and as the investigator was giving more detail as to how the 13-year-old was decapitated, one of them had to leave the courtroom. Aguilar told investigators that Palomino held his hand with the knife to behead the 13-year-old. In court, the investigator says Aguilar told them that they had to kill Lopez because she witnessed her grandmother's murder. Mendoza was Lopez's main guardian. Lopez was also on the autism spectrum. Investigators added that Mendoza had connections to drug operations with the Sinaloa cartel. Reporting in Madison County, Lauren Scharf, WAFF 48 News.
What in the blue blazes is going on? And so, wait a minute. You come over here from a drug cartel, take an Alabama grandmother and her 13-year-old autistic grandchild, murder the grandmother, and then decapitate the child. Really? Where is ICE here? AL.com, also better known as Alabama.com, but AL.com, ran a story on this on the 20th of August. Speaking at a White House immigration event, Alabama Attorney General State Marshal pointed to the recent beheading of a Huntsville girl as an example of violence associated with the drug trade. But we don't need to ramp up the war on drugs. Of course not, right? Just this summer, our state was rocked by the brutal murder of a special needs 13-year-old girl killed by affiliates of the Mexican drug cartel, Marshall said during an immigration discussion in the East Room of the White House. Due to our state's proximity to Atlanta, a major distribution point for drugs. You know what? That's interesting to me because Atlanta is also a Western world capital for HIV infection. And one of the people who has been presiding over that slide into that interesting position is the current Democrat nominee or candidate for governor in that state, Stacey Abrams. I wonder what she has to say about it. What has she put on the plate to do something about the fact that Atlanta is a major drug distribution port? But I digress. The Attorney General went on to say, we see marijuana, cocaine, meth, and now illicit fentanyl coming into our state as a result. The drug trade brings dangerous and violent illegal aliens into Alabama. Where are the Democrats on this? Because Donald Trump has been trying to do something on immigration from day one. He's been trying to keep people out of the country who we have reason to believe are dangerous, whether they be terrorists or others. He has raised the profile of people who have lost loved ones due to illegal alien activity. Where are the Democrats? They wouldn't deal on DACA. Donald Trump put them on notice not long into his presidency to get that fixed. They didn't fix it. They've blocked and thrown words around like fecal void countries because Donald Trump called them that. And Donald Trump never said that. The only person we ever know who said that was Dick Durbin. But I wish it stopped there. Molly Tibbetts, a farm girl, I guess, in Iowa, but an Iowa teenager, was recently killed by another illegal alien. Now, we've gone back and forth on whether he was an illegal alien or not. His lawyer says he's not here illegally. Yeah, he is. The federal government and his employer say, yeah, he is. He is. And to show you where the Democrat mindset is on this, Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, showed up on CNN back on the 22nd of August, and she was asked a direct question about the Molly Tibbetts case.
I want to get one last question in here because it is a story, a very important story in the news. It has to do with Molly Tibbetts, the young woman in Iowa who was murdered, her body believed to be found yesterday. A person has been charged with it. This person is an undocumented immigrant. Mike Pence and the president have suggested the immigration laws need to be stronger so that people like this man who was accused of this murder were not in the country. Your reaction?
You know, I'm so sorry for the family here, and I know this is hard, not only for the family, but for the people in her community, the people throughout Iowa. But one of the things we have to remember is we need an immigration system that is effective, that focuses on where real problems are. Last month, I went down to the border, and I saw where children had been taken away from their mothers. I met with those mothers who had been lied to, who didn't know where their children were, who hadn't had a chance to talk to their children, and there was no plan for how they would be reunified with their children. I think we need immigration laws that focus on people who pose a real threat, and I don't think mamas and babies are the place that we should be spending our resources. Separating a mama from a baby does not make this country safer.
Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, thanks for being with us.
Have to hear it to believe it. So, what did she say? Oh, I know it's hard. Really? So, let me ask you, what's harder? Someone who's trying to enter the country illegally being temporarily separated from their children, or an American citizen dealing with an illegal immigrant who has their child permanently separated from them? Which is the bigger problem? Which one is not? Which one is real to you? Because guess what? The illegal immigrant could have solved their problem by not coming to the border. What is Molly Tibbetts' family supposed to do to protect themselves? What are you proposing, Pocahontas? What real problem are you going to solve that's going to protect the American people? How come you haven't put forward any legislation on this? I see nothing with your name on it. But you're telling other people I know it's hard, but we have real problems to solve. Maybe you being in office is actually one of the real problems that needs to be solved. The people of Massachusetts, I don't know what they're thinking about. And they're entitled to have your sorry behind if that's what they want. But we now have an immigration system that allows the Sinaloa drug cartel to get into Alabama because it's a nice midway point between Texas and Atlanta, Georgia, where they can distribute their drugs. And I don't see immigration laws keeping them out. We have MS-13 wreaking havoc throughout the country in different places. We have Southern California where, I'm sorry, illegal Mexican gang members are killing black people to get them out of neighborhoods that they want to take over. I haven't seen a thing from the Democrat Party to address any of these issues. But they want a blue wave in November because Trump is so bad. Understand this. If by some reason the Democrat Party takes over both houses of Congress, which I don't think is likely, but anything could happen because Democrats cheat, it's going to be open season on American citizens. Even more so than it is now. And it's going to be sanctuary time for illegal aliens, even those who commit crimes, more than it is now. And you'll have no one to blame. Neither will you have a recourse for at least another 2 years. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin' will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin' here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour. Female governors are among those leading the charge on abortion restrictions. This report from Yellowhammer News a few days ago. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, happens to be a Republican, supports an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court after a federal court on Wednesday struck down the state's law that bans the most frequently used second trimester abortion procedure. The law passed in 2016 and entitled the Alabama Unborn Child Protection and Protection from Dismemberment Act had previously been struck down by a lower federal judge in late 2017. Wednesday's ruling was celebrated by the ACLU. However, there may be a silver lining down the road for pro-life Americans. In the 11th Circuit decision, Chief Judge Ed Carnes wrote that dismemberment is an accurate description for the procedure that the state law banned, but ruled against the state in deference to the highest court in the land. In our judicial system, there is only one Supreme Court, and we are not it, he wrote. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, said State Marshal, another report I have, announced he was disappointed in the ruling, but seemingly encouraged by the potential of taking the case before the Supreme Court, a scenario that his office is carefully considering. Governor Ivey made it clear that she would support such an appeal, by Marshall's office. I was supportive of the bill when it passed through the legislature, and I signed it as president of the Senate, Ivy said in a press release. She continued, I am disappointed in the court's ruling. However, we should not let this discourage our steadfast commitment to protect the lives of the unborn, even if that means taking this case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Wow. She joins other female governors who are on the forefront of getting rid of abortion or restricting it. Mary Fallin in Oklahoma has signed laws. Nikki Haley, when she was governor of South Carolina, she also chose to sign laws that made abortion more difficult. Kim Reynolds, who is now the current governor of Iowa, is doing the same. You know, the interesting thing is those who want to protect life on the X chromosome side of the aisle seem to be white and Republican. I can't seem to find too many white Democrats who believe that children should not be killed in the womb. I can't seem to find them. And there happens to be a black female running for the governor's office in Georgia who definitely does not want to protect children. She's looking to expand what they call reproductive health services to underserved communities where they're not killing enough babies. This is the same woman from Atlanta, and they're pretty much all the same there. They do not believe that enough babies are getting killed. They do not believe that children should be protected. They don't. They believe the protection that children should receive is if they manage to escape the birth canal in one piece, because they do get dismembered in the womb, because these people support such practices. They want taxpayers to pay for these children that irresponsible people create. I'm not a fan of that. And for every time you hear the nonsense argument, and it is a nonsense argument, that we should make sure you don't care about the kids when they're born, you only care about them in the womb, you're just trying to control women. No, we're trying to get women to control women. If they don't want to have children, do not conceive. We are simply of the ilk that says, or of the mindset that says, if you do not want children, do not conceive them, as opposed to conceive them and then consider if they're unwanted, kill them. We find the second approach barbaric. It is infanticide. It is murder. And of the least or of the most heinous kind, for no other reason than convenience and because you can. To treat pregnancy as though it is a plague upon women, as opposed to part of the reason that they even exist, you have to be a progressive, you have to be a feminist, you have to be evil-minded. And when I see people breaking out of that mold, I wish I found more black females there, but I don't. And I don't see any black females in a position of power who are carrying the burden or the torch to protect the unborn. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there are black females out there who do not like abortion and would like to see it gone, but I don't see any of them in the halls of government with an elected office. I could be wrong, but I don't see them. And if Stacey Abrams somehow prevails and becomes Georgia's governor, which I sincerely doubt, she would not be the first one. She has made it clear that there's not enough abortion going on in her state, and we need to spread that love into underserved areas, whatever that means. This is a problem. Now, to be sure, we also have male governors who are willing to step out and oppose abortion, and I am very thankful for them. But in some ways, I'm even more thankful for females who actually get into a position of power, who actually say the purpose for which my body was created should not be hijacked by those who hate what my body produces. It's really not much more difficult than that. We live in a time where there is still a struggle. Those who favor protecting children are starting to get the upper hand, but they don't have it yet. If there is another Supreme Court justice like Gorsuch, and now Kavanaugh is being nominated, and if, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg finally does the right thing and checks out, then you could end up with a scenario very similar to what Donald Trump said during the campaign. This will end up going back to the states. The federal government will no longer have any say in it whatsoever, which is actually the preferred way of dealing with this. Get the federal government out. There are governors, there are state legislatures who are directly accountable to the people in each state, including their women. Let the people decide, instead of having 9 judges dictate. That would be a better solution for the people of the United States, for the children of the United States, for the culture of the United States, for the morality of the United States. Until you start holding people accountable for senseless loss of life, if you can't protect children in the womb or refuse to protect children in the womb, I don't understand why you believe you're going to protect them in the streets. And we don't. But now I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
It's time for Law and Order, or American society could be destroyed. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the gruesome death of Molly Tibbetts in Iowa's farm country fully illustrates the asinine nature of open border policies that have resulted in the heartless deaths of literally thousands of Americans from various backgrounds ranging from the steel canyons of Manhattan to the Pacific Palisades of California. Democrats used to champion the concept of protecting our borders. Now they support wide-open borders and voting privileges for those who venture into our republic illegally. In Texas alone, 150 Americans have been kidnapped and tortured by illegal border crossers. In addition, hundreds more in that state have been killed. The unwillingness of Democrats to join Republicans in the effort to protect our borders with a wall and getting rid of sanctuary cities along with other privileges granted to illegals reveals their awful philosophical base that encourages changing America through destructive policies. Wake up, America. The republic you save could be your very own. I'm Ron Edwards. Join me Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on AmericaMatters.us, SHR Media, and Sunday midnights on Talk America Radio Network.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force of Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Social media has now multiple problems, at least two significant ones. Let's start with a problem with ethics. Here's a story from The Guardian. Unicredit cuts ties with Facebook over data breach scandal. This is Italy's largest bank terminating advertising after the Cambridge Analytica revelations. The boss of Italy's biggest bank has ordered his staff to cut all the bank's ties with Facebook in direct response to the social media network's behavior revealed in the Cambridge Analytica data breach scandal. Facebook is not acting in an ethical way. Jean-Pierre Moustier, chief executive of Unicredit, said, "We will not use it until it has proper ethical behavior." He said that he had ordered the bank, which has more than 26 million customers, to terminate all advertising and partnerships with Facebook by the end of March. At the end of March, this past March. The move comes days after the Observer and Guardian revealed that millions of mostly U.S. Facebook users, their data had been harvested for use in political advertising in the run-up to Donald Trump's 2016 presidential election victory. That brings to the fore very simply a very, very big issue. If there was collusion, and it's a big if, considering the way it's been directed, I'll say this: the whole discussion of Donald Trump and collusion is a false flag. It is a misdirection. If you want to talk about collusion, you have to look at the other side. That's where all the collusion has occurred. We've had an investigation going on for more than a year. Well, they've had indictments, they've had convictions, and not one of those has ever even pointed or hinted in the direction of collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and Russia, which was the whole point of the investigation. And what is not investigated? Okay, well, what's going on with the Democrats and the Russians? Because there's quite a bit between Hillary Clinton and the Russians. And also, what's going on in social media? Because we were told about Russian bots and Russians and doing this, but what was Facebook doing? Harvesting users' data for political advertising. What's going on with that? And before somebody thinks this is much ado about nothing, Bloomberg ran a report back in March talking about the legal case that the United States government can have against Facebook.
Sam, it strikes me as one point of divergence. You have up here one of the most regulated parts of American industry and one of the least regulated parts of American industry. How far behind is tech, in the sense that isn't the government going to catch up with these guys?
I don't think there's any question that the government is going to catch up to them. The irony of it is, the government challenged IBM. The government challenged Microsoft. I don't think the government had much of a case in either of those. But I think the government has an unbelievable case against Facebook and the rest of these monopolistic tech companies. And they've operated under a theory that we're tech and we're the future, and therefore you can't regulate us. And if you believe that, I got a bridge to say.
It is amazing how, and we highlight these two sectors from a regulatory perspective, they do seem to be marching in different directions with, kind of a nascent movement towards continuing to roll back some of the Dodd-Frank and get banks a little more off their leash, where at the same time it seems both in Europe and the United States, both from a tax perspective and in terms of a quality assurance type standpoint, we're starting to see a little more regulation of tech.
So we might have having the sellout that we saw yesterday. In February, we also had that shakeout. Sam, how do you view the markets right now?
I read the markets as particularly in the tech arena, I'd be worried about it. I think the overall economy has gotten there really has been a Trump boost. There really has been a boost that's the result of confidence, and that's very good. At the same time, the idea that somebody like Facebook can say, we're not a utility, we're not responsible, we're just a provider of whatever anybody puts on us, that's preposterous and doesn't fit any other part of the world of regulation.
And what happens to Facebook if they actually fall under government regulation is a lot of their internal practices that are currently not being looked at, and I'll talk about one of those in a minute, is now going to come under federal review, and things will change on that platform. Some of those changes could honestly be for the better for users. Back to the article, Christopher Wiley, the whistleblower who blew the lid on the black ops at Cambridge Analytica, he told the U.S. Senate, in addition to Facebook data being accessed in Russia, so I guess Facebook and Russia had a thing going on, there are reasonable grounds to suspect that Cambridge Analytica may have been an intelligence target of Russian security services because they're that sloppy, and that Russian security service may have been notified of the existence of Cambridge Analytica's Facebook data. They were unethical and sloppy, and if there was any collusion, it was between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. There's no mention of the Trump campaign. Isn't that interesting? Oh, by the way, more than 3 million users in Europe have abandoned the Facebook network since the scandal came to life. Other advertisers have threatened to pull back from Facebook, but few have struck with a long-term boycott. Speaker Maker Sana said in March that it was concerned by the revelations about Facebook, and they withdrew its advertising, but they only did so for a week. People are catching on, and what's going to happen is that the public will dictate. Sooner or later, someone's going to come up with another network that is less problematic than Facebook, or people are simply going to become so bothered by Facebook that you're just going to leave, as some have. Facebook is still the largest player in the social media universe, but they're not the only player in the universe. Which brings us to the second problem, significant problem that's going on with our friends in cyberspace, and that is censorship, which they deny. Nevertheless, they are in real trouble. Why? Because during his latest campaign rally, the president took aim at social media censorship.
And we're also standing up to social media censorship. That's the new thing. That's the new thing. You know, I'd rather have fake news like CNN. I would rather have fake news, it's true, than have anybody, including liberals, socialists, anything, than have anybody stopped and censored. We got to live with it. We got to get used to it. We're going to live with fake news. There's too many sources. Every one of us is sort of like a newspaper. You have Twitter, you have whatever you have, Facebook. But everyone, you can't have censorship. You can't pick one person and say, well, we don't like what he's been saying, he's out.
Remember this, when Donald Trump speaks to a topic, things happen. And they think it's because Donald Trump has power. No. Donald Trump has the ear of the American people, or more to the point, vice versa. He listens to them and speaks what he understands is of importance to them, and they respond in turn by focusing negative attention on the targets he identifies. Facebook and Twitter are going to be in trouble. Because remember what Donald Trump's words did to the whole bunch of kneeling foolishness in the NFL. They still haven't recovered because they still won't relent and give in to the will of the American people. I don't know if social media can be as stubborn as the NFL Players Association, but we'll see. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking, will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. About a decade, a little bit more than a decade back, there was tremendous concern. It was all over the news, almost everywhere you looked. There was a concern because the honeybee population around the world, especially in the United States, was decreasing. And the same panic meisters who brought us climate change and back in the 70s told us about the coming ice age were now talking about the bee-apocalypse. But it turns out that perhaps they were a little bit premature in their prognostication of doom and gloom.
In 2006, something mysterious started happening to the honeybees. They were disappearing from their hives, just flying away and not coming back. Beekeepers across the country reported losing anywhere from 30 to 90% of their beehives. These losses were unprecedented, fast, and no one knew what was causing it. The strange phenomenon was dubbed colony collapse disorder, and it soon got widespread coverage on major news outlets.
The colonies have been dying off. Honeybees now in danger of disappearing. A massive, mysterious reduction in the bee population.
What agriculture and scientists continue to fear
is a phenomenon called
colony collapse disorder.
Some of the biggest commercial beekeepers, their industry may be on the brink of extinction.
And this was cause for concern because for such a small insect, honeybees have a huge impact on our food supply. As honeybee colonies collapsed, so too could our agriculture system. Talk about a major buzzkill. But despite years of panicked media coverage and the warnings of an imminent bee-apocalypse, today the number of honeybee colonies are the highest they've been in 20 years. So what happened? How did we get the bee-apocalypse so wrong? After picking up the stories that bees were mysteriously vanishing, the media was quick to declare disaster. They imagined what life would be like without bees, and warned that a bee-apocalypse was coming. And in 2013, National Public Radio declared we were hitting a crisis point for crops. A share of the blame was given to everything from genetically modified crops and pesticides to even cell phones and Wi-Fi messing with the bees' sense of direction. Major companies like Cheerios and Haagen-Dazs launched Save the Bee campaigns. And even the Obama administration developed a national strategy to promote honeybees and other pollinators.
Oh no, it's a bee! That's okay, guys. Bees are good.
So why was there so much concern about bees in the first place? Well, because honeybees pollinate 1/3 of the foods we eat. Over 100 different kinds of fruits, nuts, and vegetables rely on bees and other pollinators to make them grow. Every year, millions of bees are loaded onto semis and trucked around the country, from the blueberry fields of Maine to the almond groves of California, to pollinate an estimated $15 billion worth of crops. Hey, they don't call it busy as a bee for nothing. But as bees travel around the country, they often come into contact with things that can make them sick. Things like viruses, pesticides, and parasites, like the varroa mite, a nasty bloodsucker that can devastate bee colonies. It's believed that these stressors and perhaps some others combined are the likely cause behind colony collapse disorder, or CCD. And as bee losses continued, it looked like we'd be forced to see what life would be like without them. But while the government worked on a national strategy for pollination and the media was crying disaster, beekeepers quietly found a way to address the problem. Honeybees are essentially livestock animals, but unlike cattle, they can replenish their numbers very quickly. Compared to the 2 to 4 calves a cow might have in their lifetime, queen bees can lay 1,500 eggs in a single day. And commercial queen breeders can rear large numbers of bees quickly to meet increased demand. Rebuilding hives is nothing new for beekeepers. Often, they'll split a hive into 2 and buy a new queen bee for about $20. The new hive can be ready to pollinate after a few weeks. Beekeepers also can simply buy bees to replenish their hives. A package of 12,000 bees costs about $100. Beekeepers can recoup these extra costs from the pollination fees they charge farmers. And it seems to be working. Despite losses from CCD, beekeepers have grown honeybee colonies to their highest number in 20 years. So while CCD continues to perplex scientists, there doesn't seem to be any imminent danger that the honeybees will go extinct. The good news is, reports of CCD have been declining in recent years. And that's great, because honeybees are vitally important to the diversity of our food supply. And that's something we should appreciate, even when they're not in the headlines. But it seems clear that all the media buzz over colony collapse disorder and the warnings of an imminent beepocalypse and a world without bees turned out to be totally wrong.
Like I said, we had this same type of stuff going on back in the 1970s when Leonard Nimoy had a program after his Star Trek days, and he was out there along with others throughout the media. Time Magazine, CBS News, everybody was talking about we're going to have an ice age. It should have happened already, by the way. It didn't. Same thing, and those are the same people who turned around and said that we had global warming, by the way. And now that's not happening, and so now we're moving in another direction again. The same people who like to stir up hysterics are talking about bee colonies going away, but they're now at a 20-year high. As a matter of fact, not only are they at a 20-year high in the U.S., they're at a 20-year high around the globe. World honeybee colonies are significantly larger than they were in the 1990s. So, is that the big deal? That people just went out there and they were wrong? No. But this actually could be a big deal. Why would a large corporation go out and do this?
Walmart has applied for a patent to create drone pollinators. According to CNN, the retailer would use the drones to fill a pollination gap left by a declining bee population. Scientists say pesticides have wreaked havoc on bees, a population Walmart relies on to sell some of its products. The patent document describes drones with pollen detector sensors and unmanned aerial vehicles that collect pollen from one crop, then distribute it to another. A Walmart spokesperson says, quote, "We're always thinking about new concepts in ways that will help us further enhance how we service customers, but we don't have any further details to share on these patents at this time."
Let's be clear about something. That first longer clip I played for you was made in January of 2018. The second shorter clip I played was from March of 2018. In other words, that the beepocalypse, or the beepocalypse that we thought was coming, or that some thought was coming, that had passed and that was no longer a threat, was known before Walmart filed a patent to come up with a robotic honeybee. If I can figure that out, are you trying to tell me that nobody at Walmart did? What do they need? So what do they really want this for? And if you go out and take a look at robotic little creatures, some that weigh as little as a raindrop, you'll find that they are out there making robots that can fly and that also can go underwater. The same robot. Can you imagine what this can do in the hands of a private enterprise or a military enterprise? Something as small as a honeybee that weighs as much as a drop of rain and that can go underwater or fly through the air. I wonder what they might be able to use that for. Are you curious? Because I certainly am. Particularly when it's in response to a hoax. And it's giving them cover to say, well, we're just trying to be responsible. We're looking for new ways. There might be a problem and we want to make sure that we can still service our... What happens when the robotic bees start competing with the natural bees? What do you do then? What happens when they start, and I know this sounds like conspiracy theory, but what happens when they start having the robotic bees carry things on them that are harmful to the natural bees, so that if they come in contact, don't say this is unheard of, because out here where I live in California, they're known to doctor up one type of insect to take out mosquitoes, and they spray. Well, actually, they'll spay or neuter mosquitoes and then release them into the or flies and release them into the population so that they mate with other flies, and these flies obviously have a very short lifespan, so it basically wipes everybody out. So what happens if you come up with a robot that can wipe out honeybees because it can fly just like them? If it can be taught to locate flowers, it can be taught to locate hives. It can be taught to locate people, certain types of people. You following me? When people start going around and coming up with things that they don't need to have, that's a good time to be concerned about what they're up to. That's just one man's opinion. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida, Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, let's talk a little bit about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, homosexual marriage, and the Me Too movement. World News Daily, WND.com, put out a story just a few days ago, less than a week ago. A gay duo married by Ginsburg has been accused of rape. Supreme Court Justice, Associate Justice Ruth Ginsburg was criticized when she publicly advocated for same-sex marriage and officiated a ceremony while the issue was before the court. There was a formal motion for her to recuse herself from the case, which she ignored. Why would you ask her to recuse herself? Because how can you be already decided by making public statements and actually officiating a wedding ceremony and then try to say that you can objectively evaluate? You cannot. This is one of the reasons why I hope the old buzzard retires or leaves the court by some other means. I really don't care at this juncture. She is harmful. And I really don't care what happens to the harmful. You might recall that not only she, but Elena Kagan, who had worked in the Obama administration, and of course Obama was pro-homosexual marriage, both of these women were asked to recuse themselves as would be appropriate for a case on which they have either made public statements, publicly taken sides, or advocated for one side, as in the case of Elena Kagan. They did neither. They did neither. Now, apparently, Ruth Bader Ginsburg married more than one homosexual couple, and I'm sure she was happy and proud to do it. But now one of the duos that she married is dragging her name back into the news, and not in a positive way. The New York Daily News reports that David Daniels and Scott Walters, whom Ginsburg married in 2014, are under investigation for allegedly drugging and violently raping a student in 2010. The report notes that Daniels, who is 52, and the most famous countertenor in the world, and his now husband Walters, who's 36, kind of a May-December thing going on there, is a respected conductor. Those two they're so highly regarded that they were married in 2014 by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Samuel Schultz alleges that in 2010 the two men drugged and raped him following a performance in Texas. So he waited 8 years. You see where this is going? Doesn't this sound kind of like, well, we'll get to that. He claims he was left unconscious and woke the next afternoon, in a strange bed, disoriented, in pain, and bleeding. The report said Schultz was a 23-year-old grad student at Rice University, and he kept his experience secret for years because he feared repercussions. Where have we heard this scenario before? Emboldened by both the Me Too movement and upon learning that Daniels had made tenure at the University of Michigan, where he'd be in close personal contact with young aspiring singers, Schultz filed a complaint with the University of Michigan Police Department's Special Victims Unit in July. Authorities in Michigan in turn passed the complaint on to the Houston Police Department. The investigation is active and no arrests have been made. They declined to provide any further details. You catching on to this already? Me Too has hit the homosexual circuit, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Everything you just heard is little different from what you would hear in some other Me Too case. I didn't want repercussions. They were so powerful. I couldn't say anything. But then I got enraged, and the others were coming forward, and I saw how these people could possibly do harm to someone else, and then I just felt compelled to speak. It sounds like everything that you've heard about the Me Too movement and every bogus... What's the difference between this and what's happening to even Keith Ellison, a gentleman who I despise, but I don't think they're telling the truth in his case. The one thing I can say about this case is that there is an investigation. So you have to believe that there's a chance that facts will come out. But 8 years after the fact, that shouldn't be a big hurdle since you convicted Bill Cosby on something that happened in the prior century, even though the behavior of that person would indicate that she was cool with whatever occurred. This is where we are. So now this married couple, while they were not married, drugged and raped another man, so he says, and now there's an investigation underway. I'm sure that they will deny, because if you acknowledge it, then I guess everything's over. Speaking of the Me Too movement, because he said, hey, because of the Me Too movement, this is, everybody's got a story. You don't have to sit on it anymore. You can come out and speak. It doesn't say whether the young man was homosexual or not, but I guess you kind of get that inference. Again, back to the Me Too movement. Why is the Me Too movement harmful? Does anybody remember Nikki Jovino, Sacred Heart University student, accused 2 young men of raping her? Problem was, as in so many of these other instances involving women, we'll see what's going to happen in this case where a man is charging 2 men with rape, she lied. Recently, after going through a trial, being convicted, she came upon her sentencing, and ABC 7 in New York reported on that case on this wise.
Now to that false rape charge, 1 year in prison. That sentence tonight for the woman who falsely accused 2 football players from Sacred Heart University in Connecticut of rape. The students say what she did has changed their lives forever, even though they have been cleared of all wrongdoing. Eyewitness News reporter Marcus Solis with our lead story tonight. He's live in Bridgeport. Marcus.
That's right, Bill. Those 2 students were never arrested, never charged with any crime, but the accusation was serious enough, so much so they say they had to leave school. Their reputation in tatters. She pursed her lips. She rolled her eyes, but Nikki Jovino's body language couldn't change the outcome. A year in jail for telling a lie that cost 2 young men their college careers.
My life has been altered and shaped in ways that nobody here could imagine.
Malik St. Hilaire was never arrested, but Yavino claimed he and another student raped her while all three attended Sacred Heart University in 2016. Instead, it was the Long Island native who was charged when the police investigation revealed sexual activity had occurred but was consensual. Prosecutors say Yavino made up the rape claim because she didn't want to upset another student she was interested in.
Her willingness to accept this plea deal reflects her accountability for what happened.
But it wasn't that simple. At first, Yavino insisted she had been assaulted and rejected a plea deal. It was only during jury selection before trial that she changed her mind again and pleaded guilty.
So I just hope that, she knows what she's done and the fact that my life will never be the same. Like, I have anxiety, I have, PTSD from this.
It's bad enough that they were accused of such heinous behavior, though never arrested. But then to have her story change over and over and over again, it's as if you were kicked while you were down.
Well, the other student who chose to remain anonymous lost a football scholarship over this. Both men say they plan to sue Yavino in civil court. As for the criminal case, she has been in custody since that guilty plea in June. It will count as time served towards that one-year sentence. And we're live in Bridgeport. Marcus Solis, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Now, she received a year sentence in jail, but she's getting time served. And then there's the possibility of getting time off for good behavior. So for basically tearing up two men's lives with a lie, she'll spend a grand total of maybe 6 months in jail, and only 90 days of that after she was formally found guilty. Is that adequate punishment? No, it's not. Because somebody lost a football scholarship. You know what? This is the same thing happened to Brian Banks when a woman in Los Angeles accused him while he was still in high school of raping her. She lied. That cost him 5 years in jail. Is anybody picking up on this yet? There is no way to look at this and determine that anything appropriate happened. The Me Too movement is horrific. Well, we want victims to be believed. No, I want them to prove their claims, and I will believe. Victims are not to be believed. Evidence is to be believed. Period. The presumption of innocence cannot be taken away from men just because women are up in their feelings. That's exactly what this chick was. That's exactly what a whole bunch of women are, up in their feelings about stuff that happened so long ago that they only decide to care about it when whenever they feel violated them, whether that's true or not, is in a position to do well. And this woman lied on these two men because she wanted to sleep with somebody else and didn't want him to think poorly of her because she was getting done in the bathroom at a party. So I got homosexual marriage, Ruth Bader Ginsburg setting folks up to rape somebody else, or marrying two people who had already committed a rape 4 years earlier. Well, she could know about that. Well, I don't know why she shouldn't know anything. She's old as dirt. And then he goes Me Too to go after them 8 years after the fact. And then you have this Ruth Bader Ginsburg, homosexual marriage, and the Me Too movement have one thing in common. All of them should go the way of the dodo bird. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we have strangeness, and strangeness is what happens every time this gentleman's name comes up, and that is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly Lou Alcindor. He has now compared the national anthem to songs of slavery. And when I read it, it seemed, to be honest, it seemed kind of strange even for him. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a strange dude. I'm not questioning his basketball accomplishments. They are significant. I think he is still the leading scorer in NBA history. He won championships with the Milwaukee Bucks and also with the Los Angeles Lakers. Came up with almost unstoppable shot, the sky hook, though Will Chamberlain handled it on a time or two. But this was just ridiculous. Ever since he stopped playing and he's decided to become more outspoken politically, he says things that are just flat out idiotic. So I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I looked up an article that actually put his words in context. And this was on PolitiFact, as a matter of fact. It says, in context, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar comparing national anthem to songs of slavery. Now, what did he actually say? Here's the opening portion of the column. He actually wrote something, which is what drew the attention. Slaves are generally expected to sing as well as work, observed ex-slave turned abolitionist Frederick Douglass. To the slave owners, singing slaves would drown out their own cruelty and oppression, clothe them in a coerced choir of decency, but it wasn't enough that the slaves had to sing. They had to sing their oppressors' feel-good songs that are summed up in the porgy and best refrain of, I've got plenty of nothing and nothing's plenty for me, yea, nothing. Currently, the song being demanded is the national anthem during football games, but during a warm-up game on August 10th, despite President Trump's previous condemnation, several Eagles players kneeled during the national anthem or raised their fists, their way of singing their own song. For them, lyrics like Land of the Free don't accurately represent the daily reality for people of color. They love their country but want that country to recognize the suffering that occurs when it isn't living up to its constitutional promises. Let's start with these lies one by one. First of all, nobody's asking these clowns to sing. Nobody is singing on the football field to please the owner. It's not happening. Second, they're not slaves. They are paid 6, 7, sometimes 8 figures to the left side of the decimal point per year to play a game. A violent game, yes, but a game. They're not producing a thing for all that money. 3, if they're not in the land of the free, please explain to me how they can make all that money for producing absolutely nothing. In 4 years, which is about the average career span of an NFL player, they can make millions of dollars, more money than someone who does not play a game for a living can expect to see in several lifetimes of earning, even if they are highly educated. Doesn't happen. And no one is demanding the song to be sung. The last thing that came up is, if you don't have anything constructive to do during the national anthem, just stay in the locker room. You don't need to be on the field during the national anthem. Your warm-up is over. It's got nothing to do with you playing the game. As a matter of fact, up until I believe it was 2009, there wasn't really a deal with the national anthem anyway. It was only when some fool named Colin Kaepernick, who decided after sleeping with one of the few heterosexual female members of Black Lives Matter, decided he was black instead of the white he had been raised. He had a white mother, a white adoptive mother, white adoptive father, white adoptive siblings, and a pet tortoise. I don't know how you get any whiter than that, but actually after he started knocking boots with a Black Lives Matter female, all of a sudden he became black turtleneck and camouflage pants. This is ridiculous. And now you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trying to say that the national anthem, because of their response to it or their feelings about it, has suddenly become a slave song that they are singing to drown out their oppression. You know what? I don't remember too many people waiting on the sidelines, chomping at the bit for you to get hurt so they can go into the cotton fields and pick that cotton for you. I don't think that was the way it went. But every weekend I have folks lined up looking for the opportunity to go in the game. And if the only reason it is because someone gets hurt, they'll take it. They don't mind. Works for them. There is no comparison. America is a free country, no matter what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar may think. These people do not have plenty of nothing, and nothing is plenty for them. They have much more than nothing. They have money. They have prestige they have not earned. A football player does nothing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they are incapable. I'm saying they just simply do not. If we were talking about the 50s and 60s, if we were talking about people like Sam Huff, if we were talking about people like Jim Brown, if we were talking about people like Willie Davis and others of the Green Bay Packers, playing in an era where there was not so much money in football that you had to have a job in the off season in order to make ends meet, and usually that meant you had to be part of the community economically, well, then you could talk about somebody who may have plenty of nothing, but guess what? They still felt great about themselves for being able to play a game that they greatly enjoyed. And none of them would have said, we got nothing. If you played football during the season for whatever money they paid you and then had your own hardware store, supermarket, or car dealership in the off season in that same community where you had some of the best name recognition that you could have and people would come into your place, I dare say that you could do well. There's no oppression here. This idea that people are, that this country is not living up to its constitutional promises, no. NFL blacks are not living up to their constitutional responsibilities. If blacks in the NFL really want to do something positive for their community, why don't they go out into their community and stop the violence? Why don't they take a knee where people are being shot in Chicago, in St. Louis, in Detroit, in New Orleans, in Washington, D.C., and about 20 other places in the United States where blacks do not have an exceedingly long lifespan because they're killing one another? Why don't they go over, if they care so much about blacks in this country, why don't they go over into a neighborhood that has more abortion clinics than grocery stores and take a knee in front of every one of them and stand up for the right for blacks simply to be born? I don't see that happening. And where were these clowns during the off season? If they were so oppressed, how come they were not made to work and practice for all those nights and days from the end of the Super Bowl to the beginning of training camp? They're oppressed, aren't they? They should not have an off season. This is foolishness. It's abject and absolute foolishness from a very tall, very talented, and very foolish man. There is no exploitation of football players that they do not want, that they do not welcome, and for which they are not well compensated. If they don't want that, we now have in America more job openings than we have job seekers. If they don't want to play football, there's work someplace. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLVB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Jemele Hill is now wild and free. Why? Because she is parting ways with ESPN. You can say that she was fired. You can say that she's taking a buyout. Both of those things may be simultaneously true. But a Fox News report has it that Jemele Hill, ESPN commentator who has made controversial remarks about President Trump, not to mention some NFL owners, most notably Jerry Jones, is leaving the sports network, according to reports. A buyout of her reported $2.5 million per year contract has been completed, and her last day will be Friday, which was this past Friday. The separation was due to Hill's desire to be involved in politics, while ESPN wants to be apolitical. Now they want to be apolitical because it's starting to cost them. They are still hard left, and their commentators are hard left. Hill is believed to have met recently with new ESPN president James Pitaro. Yes, they have a new president because the old president allowed them to drift so far left you couldn't tell. This was the last president they had was giving homosexuals, and in particular, well, those who wanted to be transsexual, kind of, sort of, Bruce Jenner, he was getting the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage to him for acting like a woman. Don't know how that had anything to do with anything. At a meeting with reporters earlier this month, Pitaro emphasized that ESPN's role is to cover sports news without any particular political bias. The executive reportedly said he would prefer that the company's journalists and commentators not offer their own opinions on political matters. The controversy surrounding Hill began last September 11th when she referred to Trump as a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. The next month, ESPN suspended Hill for 2 weeks after she posted a tweet suggesting that viewers boycott advertisers of the Dallas Cowboys. She was voicing disagreement over Jerry Jones's comment that NFL players regarding his comments about protests during the national anthem. She even acknowledged that she deserved the suspension. Let's back up here. $2.5 million per year contract. For $2.5 million per year, I will say, or limit my comments to whatever the guidelines are. For $210,000 per month, almost, that's not good enough for you. You have to keep talking about stuff where you are just being radical. This is what happens when you deal with radical leftist black females. At the very least, and it is least, the very least we can say about her is she doesn't appear to be homosexual. That's about it. But everything else about her is so far left, she's not in the American mainstream, just like she was part of the reason that ESPN was no longer in the American mainstream. That's why they were hemorrhaging subscribers. The NFL is no longer in the mainstream of America, although it was almost the heartbeat of America back in the day when you played real games and people actually got hit and flags didn't fly just because you got your bell rung. I'm not against people having their say. I'm against people trying to tell me I'm supposed to hear their say and agree with it. Jemele Hill is a bigot. Jemele Hill is a radical extremist. And she has no place on a network that is supposed to be covering sports for sports fans. And if you look at ESPN, almost to a person, with the possible exception of Sage Steele, every one of the females they have on that network, Linda Cohn might be another example, but she's been there for quite some time. Every one of them is leftist, obviously leftist. Bump the owners, the players are king, let the players protest, everything's about the players, give them their money, everything. And nobody cares about the actual audience for ESPN, which is the fans. The advertisers don't pay the players. They pay the network so that the network can offer something appealing so that enough eyeballs can see the advertiser's products. So who are we talking about again? The fans. ESPN's lost sight of that, and the best thing you could do with somebody like Jemele Hill is get her the heck out. Because you don't care about the fans. You care about your agenda, which is shared by a rather small minority of American citizens. And ESPN is trying to appeal to the broadest spectrum of American citizens. You're not saying anything anyone needs to hear. But now she's free because so much, according to her, so much of her career at ESPN, almost exclusively at some points, has been in commentary. They hired me as a columnist. I've been giving my opinion since day one. But they gave you boundaries for your opinion. You didn't care about that. During an in-depth conversation at the OZY Fest in July, Hill mused about whether or not she would continue on in sports, period. There's a real concentration, still a real need, on stories about women of color. No, there isn't. Let me put that out there. No, there isn't. We don't need stories about women of color. We have enough stories. We need character from women of color. We need women of color to not lead the nation in abortions. We need women of color not to lead the nation in STD infection rates. We need women of color not to lead the nation in illegitimacy. That's what we need. We don't need stories about what they're currently doing. We know what they're currently doing. And for the most part, it's not that good. Nevertheless, she's gone, and it's a good thing. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Keep your head up because you have no idea how much worse it's going to get between now and November. This is not even the tip of the iceberg. They are coming after the president because they're actually coming after you, and they believe that if they hit the president hard enough, you won't recognize they're coming after you. And the way that you punish them is you show up at the polls in numbers and you vote them out. Until next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.